I have a customer I talked to just the other day dealing with an issue of an employee who said something online on an anonymous source online, right? They were on Twitter and their handle wasn't their real name. And they said some things that were racist, and a lot of people took offense to that. And the thing about the internet was very strange was they started reading all the person's posts, got an idea who they were, figured out who they were, figured out where they worked, and started sending emails to to my customer, right, to their employer and saying, "Do you know what your employee's doing?" And now that employer has to decide, do I reprimand my employee for something they did off the clock? Because it actually might mean real revenue dollars disappearing because people are going to be upset.
Hey guys, I'm Chaz Roberts. I'm a personal injury lawyer. It's my life's passion to bring the law to the people, and that's the purpose of this podcast. You are listening to Law Have Mercy. Please enjoy.
Welcome to the podcast. We have today a very special guest, Tom Segura. No, I'm kidding. It's a Tom Segura lookalike. Scott Guidry with the Guidry Group.
Thank you.
How you doing, Scott?
Thank you for having me, man. Doing pretty good today.
Good, good. And you deal primarily in the area of small businesses, right? You're a lawyer helping small businesses.
That's my goal.
Yeah. Well, that's a very unique area, right? There's not a lot of lawyers that really cater to that.
No, I mean, usually if you have somebody that deals with business law, right, they're usually working for a big company or they work for a big defense firm. I know you come across those, and in your line of business, sometimes you're suing big companies. And they'll actually have sometimes those attorneys that defend them are also the ones that give them advice. So that's usually out of reach for your small business, right? They can't afford those big defense attorneys, and they certainly can't afford a full-time attorney to work for them.
And so you're able to service multiple small businesses, and they all kind of share the cost, right, of your services, but you can give them realistic advice that they need and meet them where they are.
Yeah, and look, my sole focus is helping small businesses with those issues. I don't get into the litigation, and that means I don't have to have a staff or a big firm, which means way lower overhead, which means lower cost to my to my customers, and that's the whole point, right? They're small, they're struggling. How do I help them be successful? Because when they become big, they'll remember who I am.
Well, that's pretty interesting. How did you get into the small business sphere?
It was two different ways, right? I kind of somewhat stumbled my way into a corporate gig and worked for a company that had 5,000 employees, and I was the general counsel there for 10 years. So you learn a lot there. But also my parents were entrepreneurs, man. And I watched them make a couple of businesses and fail at a couple of businesses. And, some were successful, some weren't. But over those years, you watch that and you get to see the places where, man, if they'd have just had a little bit of help or somebody explained something to them so they knew what the risks were they were getting into before they did it.
So I'm assuming a lot of small businesses are running around naked, right? They don't have a lot of the things that they probably should have in place to protect themselves.
Man, look, most small businesses fail not because a person isn't good at what they do and the product they provide, right? Somebody goes open a restaurant, it's usually because they know how to cook, but they don't understand all of the other parts of what goes into making a business successful. And being successful means being around. And so you can get sued out of an existence, right?
Yeah, and it could be something like, I've seen restaurants fail because they didn't pay their employees the right amount of money, right?
Right, legally.
There's certain federal guidelines on what you need to pay or how to pay overtime or whatever. Most businesses probably live paycheck to paycheck, and if they're hit with a back bill for unpaid overtime over a year, that could be crippling.
And look, if for that example, something like unpaid overtime, right, is back wages, that's something you can't get insurance for, right? So some people think I'll have enough insurance and no matter what bad happens, I'll be good. I'll pay my premium and I'll survive. But there's instances like that with a back wage where the insurance doesn't cover that because that was an actual thing owed to somebody. And that'll kill your company, right? You got $3 million in back wages and you don't have $3 million, you're done.
And that could have been something that cost just a couple $100 of advice, right?
A couple $100 of advice, maybe some overtime.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So what you handle small businesses, legal transactions for small businesses, what's your typical client look like?
A lot of times it's the business that's just starting, right? It's either we got an idea and we want to bring this to the world. And I also have some people that say, man, I got tired of working in whatever job they have. I don't want to be working for somebody else. I want to be my own boss. And they'll go buy a business. But they buy a business that they may not know what all goes into it. And so they need help understanding what the legal world is around that industry.
Well, I know of one case in particular, wouldn't you recommend hiring a lawyer before you purchase the business?
Oh, absolutely. Because one of the things you need to look at is the purchase agreement itself and know what you're buying, know what the potential issues are. And also, a big part of buying a business is doing due diligence. And some people buy it and just assume they haven't been sued, so they must have been doing everything right. But that means they were more lucky than good.
Right. And you don't know if there's a suit around the corner of something before you even purchased the business.
Right. And I've seen too, because I mean, with being with a big company, and some of my clients now have bought other companies, right? Companies can buy companies. And I've watched them buy it. And when they realize somebody wasn't doing something right and they go to change it, but they go to change it after they bought it, a couple years down the road, they now have alerted the people, either their customers or their employees, hey, we've been doing that wrong all this time. Please come sue me.
Yeah.
So if you do your due diligence when you're doing your purchase, you can discover those issues and make that change when you buy it. And that way you don't create liability for yourself.
Well, so I'm a lawyer, so I'm a little biased. So to me, it's like, duh. But why doesn't the average person understand that they should have a lawyer in place when they're forming their business, when they're buying a business, when they're adding a partner to the situation? Why do people not think automatically, I need to talk to a lawyer?
Because it's not required, right? To start a business, to even do one without, without an LLC. If Chaz wants to go open a restaurant and start selling stuff, he can.
Yeah.
You can, Chaz, buy the building or get the lease.
I can even get an LLC, right?
Right. And it's easy for you to get an LLC. I mean, I tell some of my clients, hey, it takes 5 minutes. I've made an LLC on my lunch break before. It's so easy. But to know what all that means, that's where a good lawyer can help explain it to you.
Yeah, the lawyer's not trying to take your money.
No, he's trying to make sure that you're successful, because if he just takes your money, then that's very short-sighted, and that's not a lawyer that's going to be around very long.
Yeah. And so you're trying to set them up for success.
100%, because that's how I have more clients that are successful and can pay the bills that I send them, right?
So you feel like you're almost, you're not a partner with them, but you're one of their teammates, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm there to find solutions for them.
Every business should have a lawyer.
Every business should have a lawyer they can call and ask questions of.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's no question that's too stupid or too major, too minor, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, look, I used to be a professor of business law, and that's where I learned to be able to explain those kinds of concepts to somebody who doesn't want to learn law, right? That's what so many of my clients are. They don't really care about learning how intricate the law is. They need somebody to just tell them what they need to know in layman's terms.
I'll be honest. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing for 13 years. I know a lot of lawyers. Before you started doing what you're doing, if somebody asked me, hey, I need this operating agreement drafted or something like that, I wouldn't know where to send them, because typically the only people that were doing business law were in some kind of law firm. That's the formalities. Oh, hold on 1 second. We have to schedule a meeting, and then we need to open a file, and then you get all this crazy paperwork initially, and you feel like you're signing your life away. Man, I just need a 4 or 5 page operating agreement so I could get rolling. Right?
And the bill they'll get, right? That's $500-$600 an hour for some of those firms. So what do they do instead? They go to the lawyers they know. Their personal injury lawyer, the one that helped them out their wreck. The divorce lawyer that got them through their divorce. And yeah, they'll ask, hey, do you know anybody that can help with this? And most of the time, those lawyers, you're right, don't know. Are you going to refer somebody to the defense firm that you got to deal with every day? Probably not.
No.
But that's where I can come in.
Well, I know that person probably can't afford that guy.
Right.
Right? Because that simple operating agreement could be a $5,000 document.
Absolutely.
And once they get that initial estimate, they're going to say, maybe I don't need an operating agreement, and keep on rolling.
They do one of two things. I can do it on my own because I can't afford that, right? Or let me just get the attorney who will take it for a smaller price. And now you have a divorce attorney writing your operating agreement for your LLC.
It's going to be an inferior product,
Correct.
potentially.
Well, I mean, as we most know, when we got out of law school, we start to specialize, as most people do, and they get in their businesses. And now you start to get to a point where they don't understand the business side of that. You know, I spent 10 years having to deal with all these issues. It's not just that I read it in a book. I had to actually see it happen and learn how to correct the business practices to get us in a place where we're being legal.
Yeah. When my clients ask me to do something that I don't, other than personal injury, I know a lot about a lot just because I've been doing this for a long time. And the bar requires you to know a little bit about a lot. But what I'll say is, like, think about a machinist or a machine shop. You know, this machine can make what you're asking me to make, but I have to stop. I got to shut the whole operation down, retool, reconfigure, and it's going to cost me too much money to stop what I'm doing to draft your operating agreement. But I will pay you. I know you'll pay me, but the opportunity cost of what I'm good at is too much for me to do. I love you and I want to help you. I just can't. There's not enough hours in the day, right?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to the idea of the old idea of cheap, fast, and good, pick two, right? That's what a lot of people do. And so for somebody like you, if you have the integrity of, I want to do that well for my client, and you want to do it at a reasonable price, well, that means it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
Because you got to go teach yourself.
Right.
Right. Or you can pay a lot of money to somebody who knows exactly what they're doing, but then you'll get it good and you'll get it fast, but you're not going to get it cheap.
That's right. So you're really filling a hole in the market because there aren't many guys who can meet these small businesses where they are and offer these types of services.
No, there isn't. I mean, that's one of the things, you know, working for a big company that bought small companies, right? They got big enough to get the attention, started to eat into somebody's, you know, market share. That's where we come in, we buy those companies. And that's where I saw a lot of times they were getting bad advice. I would do our due diligence. We'd go through it. Man, this is a bad practice. This is going to get us sued. Who told you this was okay? Oh, we had a lawyer look at it.
Yeah.
I can't tell me how many times I heard somebody tell me we had a lawyer look at it.
It could have been a personal injury lawyer. Could have been a criminal defense lawyer.
Because to me, it was so obviously wrong. It was so easy to see that is not the right way to do this. But they had a lawyer look at it, so they actually felt comfortable in that practice.
If somebody wanted to start a business tomorrow, what would they do?
First thing is I tell you, go start an LLC. Go get a tax ID number. Why do you do that? So you can start a bank account. Now, if you have, that's for somebody that's starting it on their own. If you have a partner, then you need an operating agreement to go with that. But those are the top three things.
And why is it so important to get an LLC? Do you need one?
Yes.
Legally, do you need one?
To actually operate a business and not get shut down? No. But you need an LLC. It's to protect you. And when I say you, right, we all have things we have in our life that we hold dear, our money, our houses, all those things, your car. Those are the things that can be taken from you if your business makes a mistake. If you don't have an LLC, the whole idea is it's a limited liability company. And that means that the only thing you're risking if that company makes a mistake is the things that company owns.
So it shields your personal liability, your personal assets by creating this bubble.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I said, that company that maybe paid people wrong and owed $3 million in back wages, they're not going to have to take that out and go sell their house, right? They will have to take everything they can out of their company to pay for it, but it's not going to ruin their entire life.
Why would the government allow this shield of liability? Why would the government think that that's a good thing?
It creates more business. It creates more opportunities for people, right? Because if not, without this limited liability and this legal scheme that kind of puts a bunch of things in place for you, it allows your small business to actually be competitive. because the big companies have lawyers and contracts and all this stuff that everybody's going to sign away their rights to sue them because they have a bunch of smart people with a bunch of money.
Creating very complex corporate documents.
And that's going to create this gap that gets even wider and wider. As they get more powerful, they're just going to be able to do better at that. But an LLC and the government created this way for a small business to come in and be able to compete with that.
What about now that we have all these, there's a lot more people that are self-employed probably since the pandemic, right? People have found other ways to make money from home, whether it's arbitrage selling on Amazon or the gig economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are those people considered small businesses to you?
Yeah. I mean, the gig economy gets a little different, but that's actually the argument Uber makes, is that they're all independent contractors. So their argument is every one of those people is their own business, and they're required to get their own insurances for their own cars to cover their own liabilities.
But if they run their business some of those people run their operation as a business. Some of those people hire other people to drive for them and lease cars and all kinds. Those people should probably have LLCs too.
100%. I mean, I know people that, have a deal where they deliver packages for Amazon, that last mile kind of thing, right? And at some point they get busy enough, they hire somebody else to drive another van for them. And you should absolutely have an LLC for something like that.
Should those people consult a lawyer in their operations?
Yeah, because look, an LLC is the very basic thing, right? The first three things you do is those things. But now, do you know why I said you should have a tax ID number and why you should have a checking account? Because an LLC on paper by itself gives the first presumption that there's a limited liability. But our law does say, hey, you don't get to just create LLCs and then that's it. You have to actually operate it like it's separate from your personal finances.
It has to look like a company.
You have to not pay for your personal stuff. Like, you don't pay for your vacation out of your company's money. Because now they're saying, well, you've mingled the two, so your personal life is your business life.
And a skilled personal injury attorney, if I wanted to sue this LLC, if they're not operating their business like an LLC, if they're only an LLC in name, I can pierce the veil.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we call piercing the corporate veil. And that's why the operating agreements come in especially important too, right? You need to have your meetings. You need to do all these things. And a lot of people do that. They have meetings and they do all the things we're talking about. But we go back to the idea of it's not just that you do the right things, but you have to put that on paper because the lawyer is going to go and say there's no proof you did that.
Speaking of operating agreements, have you in your business dealings, not only with your former employer when you were general counsel, but getting out in the community and talking to small businesses who've consulted your services, has it stunned you how many businesses are operating without some of these bare essential legal tools?
It is shocking, but sometimes I guess it's not too, because they just don't know, right? That's the biggest part that scares me is people are just walking around. It's almost like not knowing your seatbelt's going to save your life. And they don't wear them because they don't think it's that important. That's what scares me.
And they don't think it's important because it's never come up?
Yeah. They don't know a friend that it's had it come up, or they think it's scary that a lawyer is going to be, like you said, this big stuffy guy that's going to require all this money and is going to speak in these words I don't understand. And it gets scary. And people, when they're scared, they just avoid things sometimes.
Put their head in the sand.
Yeah. I mean, look, my dad was so afraid of drowning, he didn't learn to swim.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Absolutely not. But it made sense to him, and he never drowned because he just stayed away from the water.
Right. But in business, you may be failing to take certain risks that could benefit your business.
Well, if you started a business, you already jumped in the water.
Yeah.
You had to learn how to swim.
Right. So why not go all the way?
Right.
And an operating agreement is important if you have more than one owner.
That's the whole idea. The operating agreement is really the rules of the game between me and you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't even explain what an operating agreement is.
Right. Well, any contract is these are the rules me and you are going to play by. These are what we agreed to. And knowing the rules before you start doing something is what you do to reduce all kinds of tension and all kinds of other things. It lets you know what to expect when this bad thing happens. When we want to do this, this is what's going to happen.
If one of the partners passes away untimely, how does his shares get divided? Does his wife get it, or is it a right of first refusal to the partner? Or?
I got a customer right now that's trying to figure out how they get one of their partners to exit the business. And what do they do with the shares, and how they determine what the fair market value of what those shares are. And that's an entire deal where they started out as friends starting a business. And at some point, the business, they had different ideas of what direction they wanted to go. And it was time to split ways. And their operating agreement was 2 pages long. And I'm not saying an operating agreement has to be 60 pages, but it did not address this situation. So now they're arguing about it because nobody decided to say, what are the rules going to be then? And so they have different ideas of what they think in their head the rules should have been.
Do people avoid sitting down to draft an operating agreement? Okay, they know, Scott, you're cool, you're laid back, you're going to meet at their office, awesome. But they don't want to sit down to have the difficult conversations with their partner and state the rules of the game.
Oh, dude, look, I'm what some people call a pessimist, or I'm a very anxious person. So my job and what I do all day long is worry about things. I worry about how stuff's going to go wrong. And so many people that start a business usually are very optimistic. They're very excited. They only see all the ways this is going to be a very successful and a very good thing.
Right.
So it's good to have somebody else to come in and say, let me try to think of all the ways this can go bad. And then I'll give you that scenario. And I ask my customers, what do you want to do in the case that happens? Because they hadn't thought about what could go bad.
No business that has ever started thought that it would not succeed.
No. Or why would they start it?
Why would they start it? But we know what percentage fail.
Oh, I mean, it's I think 90-something% fail within the first 5 years. I think 50% fail in the first year.
That's insane.
And like I said, people don't start businesses because they're bad at what they do.
Could it be also that people assume, look, we don't have any money now. If we make money, we'll figure it out later. I'm good, you're good. We'll be cheering if we make anything. So we'll figure out the split later.
It's so much harder to figure it out later because now you have different conceptions of where things should be and how it should have been done and how it should be in the future. And now you already have a problem and you're trying to figure out how to deal with it without any rules, right? That's like playing the game of football without any rules.
And if they didn't do it from the initial setup, when is the next best time?
It's just like growing a tree. The next best time is now. The best time was when you started it. The next best time is now.
I agree. Switching gears, some people, there's a lot of discussion about whether if you're in real estate and you have rental properties, whether you should purchase the real estate in the name of an LLC or individually. Do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, look, as with anything, if you're buying a house as a rental, then you've created a business, right? You could buy it in your own name, and sometimes people do because they actually get better interest rates as individuals than businesses. But the thing about that is I would tell you not only to put your investment property in an LLC, but if you decide to buy more than one, put them each in their own LLC. Now, somebody's like, why am I going to go through all of that? That's complicated. Well, here's the idea. Let's say you happen to have done something wrong. You make a mistake. You cause an injury to somebody that's living in one of your residences. And they sue you. And they sue you for money that is more than that house is worth. Well, you can sell the house and pay off that particular thing. But if you own multiple residences, they now can actually recover from the entire business because you haven't separated them. But if you have a separate LLC for each residence, then only that residence is responsible for those losses. Just like you can't come after my personal house. Well, now you can't come after that house because that's owned by a separate LLC. And the way we've created these LLCs, I know people have seen it with the political side of things, but an LLC by a legal creation is its own person, right? It can't go vote, but otherwise it can be sued in its own right. It has its own money. It has its own assets.
But that's all going to cost money, right? To start the LLC, to renew it each year. The bank may not allow the LLC to own the property.
Usually the banks will. I mean, they understand that concept. I mean, banks have their own nested LLCs, right? You see a lot of conglomerations that own the business owns other businesses. So they understand that concept.
You definitely can't sign only in the LLCs. And you probably on the mortgage, you'll probably need to sign individually, right?
Well, what they'll do is they'll ask for a personal guarantee because they don't want to create the illusion that they both own the house. The LLC owns the house, but me, the individual, says if they can't pay the mortgage, the LLC, Scott will pay the mortgage for them.
Yeah.
That protects the bank.
So you're still on the hook individually to the bank.
Right.
However, you're still shielding your liability as to
Anyone else.
Somebody trips and falls on the property and wants to sue you or something to that effect.
Yeah.
I personally, I mean, I think that that's great, and I think that that's a super safe way of looking at things. But if someone asked me my opinion, I would probably say, how much insurance do you have on the property, right? The likelihood, it's hard to generalize because it all depends on the type of property and the value of the property. But it's hard for me to think that someone can recover over $1 million for something that happens on your property that you had no control over, right? Because, and look, again, you could have signed a lease on a property with bad electrical boxes that you had actual knowledge of or something to that effect, right? It all depends on the property. But if it's a good property, well-maintained, used to be your home, now it's a rental property, it's hard for me to imagine that someone can collect more than the insurance amount and come after me personally if I'm not there. If I didn't dig a hole and put metal spikes with bamboo covering the hole, it's hard for me to think that it would rise to that occasion.
Well, now we go back to the idea we had before, too, with the operating agreement, is how good is your lease, right? Once again, did you consult a lawyer and have a lease that says who's responsible for these things? Am I, the landlord, responsible for making sure the electrical problems are sorted out? Or did I put that on you? So then you wouldn't be able to sue me at all if it was something you were responsible for maintaining.
So that's another type of contract outside of creating a whole LLC and stuff like that, where that the lessor or renter can protect themselves from liability.
Right. And look, I mean, the thing about having these different agreements is sometimes it is what avoids litigation, because litigation itself is expensive. To sue somebody, you don't have to be right. You have to believe you have a legal right to what that is, and then you figure that out through the process of the lawsuit.
The barrier to filing a lawsuit is very low.
Correct.
And anyone can do it.
And that's where contracts can help to keep those things at bay, because we already knew what the rules were. When you file a lawsuit, a lot of times it's to discover more things. That's why we have something in lawsuits called discovery.
Well, and not just that, but if you have an operating agreement, you can have an intra-business suit where one partner is suing the other partner, and they're both spending money and potentially even the business's money for this fight.
I mean, a great example of that from a different way, but there's something they call a shareholder derivative lawsuit, right? I own part of this business, and there are certain things that even though you may own more of it, you have a duty to everybody, the whole business, not to Chaz. And one of those cases was Twitter recently. Twitter was, Elon Musk offered to buy Twitter. And then the board was kind of going back and forth. Well, the shareholders came up and said, hey, he's offering us a lot more money than it's worth. You need to take the deal. And that's one of those ways that somebody can come up and say, I don't agree with the way you're running our business. We're going to have to settle that in court.
So we talked about wages, back wages. What are some of the other employment issues that you see businesses handle and do and are really missing the mark?
Man, there's two big areas. I'll start with one, and that's the ADA compliance. I don't think people realize the ADA is the American Disability Act. And so, we all know about certain ways that businesses have to comply with that, right? You have to have a certain amount of handicap parking spots. They have to be within a certain distance of your building.
Ramps,
right?
Parking spaces.
But a business has to also accommodate their employees from an ADA perspective, right? That's why you go in and the bathrooms have a certain large stall. And most businesses do those things, right? Mostly because their builders understand the codes. Where people get a little squirrely is there's so many things that count as a disability under the ADA. Because it just means that you have to have something that impairs your ability to go through life. Obesity is a covered disability. There's alcoholism is a covered disability, right? So not active alcoholism, but if you're treated, I can't say, oh man, you showed up drunk, but now you've gone and you've decided to quit drinking and you're seeking treatment. I have to honor that and to give you a reasonable accommodation. And that's the biggest word is reasonable accommodation. I've seen some cases where somebody said they're really allergic to stuff and they wanted to have their own air filter in their own office and all of these things. And they were just a frontline employee. So the business had to look and have a conversation with them and say, well, let's see if we can make that. Is that reasonable? Do we have an empty office space we can put you in? And they didn't. So what's the next thing? And they went through a lot of iterations. They got an air filter they put in the person's cubicle and they did some things and the person still didn't think it was enough. But at some point, a business doesn't have to do everything, but they do have to try and they do have to have a conversation.
And how big does the business need to be to fall within the ADA standards?
I think it's more than 10 employees, but
right. So that's not huge.
No, I mean, that's very small business.
And that's restaurants.
That's restaurants. I mean, that's
grocery stores.
That's all kind of things. I mean, that can be your small insurance agency. There all kinds of places where that comes in.
And you definitely can't terminate someone because they have a disability.
You can't terminate them. You could, but you could do it if the accommodation they're seeking is unreasonable or is overly burdensome to your company, right? Hey, I got a sensitivity to temperature and I need the office to be at below 65 degrees. Well, it's not like we have individual AC units for each person. So I can't do that if it's going to severely impact the production of the entire company.
Is that something that you can help businesses on? Like, can they call you and say, hey man, we have this issue and we could use some counsel on figuring out an accommodation or how we go about not accommodating that person?
That was a conversation I had with the company I worked with before. We had 5,000 employees because there was always somebody that had some issue they wanted us to consider. And very often HR would call me and we would have a discussion with me and HR and that manager and say, let's figure out how we do this. Partly, like we said, to make sure that on paper, we're showing that we did what we were supposed to do. Because you could do the right thing and then not have any way to show that you did it.
So when I'm a business owner, if I want to terminate someone, okay, the general rule in Louisiana is employment at will. And I know that, look, I can tell you, I've gotten many, many, many calls where someone was saying they got fired and they felt that they shouldn't have been fired because X, Y, Z. And I just always remember my employment law professor saying employment at will has never lost a fight in Louisiana.
Not under Louisiana law, but here's the part, and this was the second thing that I probably see businesses deal with the most. The ADA kind of falls into this, but federally, which is the American Disabilities Act, is one of those, but there's some other things where we've created protected classes of employees. So yeah, I can fire you because I just don't like your attitude, but I can't fire you because you're black. I can't fire you because of your sexual orientation or your actual sex or gender, your nationality. There's a lot of areas. I actually, even though I'm a white male, I'm over 40 years old. So if I was working for you and I'm the only person over 40 and you decide, hey, I'm going to go get somebody who's younger, who's usually cheaper, you may have an issue if the reason you did it is because I was younger.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And that conversation is the one I had more often with the businesses. Once again, not because they didn't fire somebody for a good reason or want to, right? This person has not been performing. But what I go look at is, all right, show me all the paperwork that shows that they weren't performing. And did they know that? Where's your performance evaluations every year? And then some people did theirs, but they never want to have those tough conversations with their employees, right? Nobody ever wants to really say, here's all the places you're not doing well. We all have those conversations when they make big mistakes, but if they're just not meeting your expectations, people don't like to have that and put that on paper. But that's what saves you, because now you can say, no, I didn't fire you because you're black or you're a woman or you're old. I fired you because you weren't very good at your job.
And I have all the paperwork to back it up.
Right.
But how many of those businesses have sufficient paperwork?
The big businesses don't do it. There's so many times that I had to deal with the issue of we already fired somebody. And now they're saying you did it because I was a woman.
Right. And you want to jump up out your chair and say, no, she didn't do this, 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 and this, and this. And he didn't do this, this. And
that's what the managers will tell me. As soon as I get the claim from the employee that, hey, and that's the problem. Now I got it from the EEOC, right? Or I actually got a lawsuit. And that's the first time me, the lawyer, is finding out about it. And I can only do so much with bad facts, right? The law is the law and the facts are the facts. And you did not help me out with that because you didn't do the things on the front end. And we may win this. We may be able to prove that person was really bad at their job. But guess what's going to happen in that process? We're going to spend a lot of money to be right.
But can we at least acknowledge that employment at will is the general rule, and most terminations will go unchecked because I can fire you right now because I don't like your shoes.
Mm-hmm. Most do, right? Most people do complain to their friends or something else. Man, that wasn't fair. That wasn't right.
Or even call a lawyer.
Yet they're afraid to call lawyers. And sometimes lawyers are afraid to take on the big businesses.
And that's just the way it goes.
That's the way of the world, right? Sometimes it's how much money can the lawyer make. I mean, there's that, right? The person wasn't working a really high paying job. So the best you're going to get is future wages, and that might not be a lot.
And it's not worth the fight.
Right.
So these are all realities in employment situations, right?
Employment law sometimes is the one that'll kill a company before anything else. Right? That's what we were talking about earlier, the back wages kind of scenario. That's the stuff that you can't insure for. You're not allowed to.
And it's awkward, and it's not sexy, and it's not bringing in any money into the firm.
No, right. I mean, look, if I make a product and I put warning labels in the box and all these other things, it's way easier, and I can make a design of that product better, and every product's going to be the same. Employment law is dealing with people. We're all different. We all react to things differently. The way I fire you and the way I fire the next person, if I say it exactly the same way, I might end up with an adverse reaction from one and not the other. That's the biggest thing I usually have to also help my businesses get through is understanding how to deal with people, both their employees and their customers.
And the reputational harm from a rogue former employee.
Oh,
they may have trade secrets. They may have information about how you do things.
Oh, dude, the internet is forever. It's beautiful. It's scary. It's powerful. But people have the ability to research a lot about your company. If you do something wrong, your employees have the ability to disseminate information very quickly, and it can't come back, right? You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube.
I've seen that recently on Facebook. There was a group of rogue employees from a local business that, with the stroke of a key, they can take out 5 years of goodwill that the business created in the environment.
I have a customer I talked to just the other day dealing with an issue of an employee who said something online, on an anonymous source online, right? They were on Twitter and their handle wasn't their real name. And they said some things that were racist, and a lot of people took offense to that. And the thing about the internet was very strange was they started reading all the person's posts, got an idea who they were, figured out who they were, figured out where they worked, and started sending emails to my customer, right, to their employer and saying, do you know what your employee's doing? And now that employer has to decide, do I reprimand my employee for something they did off the clock? Because it actually might mean real revenue dollars disappearing because people are going to be upset, right? That person didn't do anything to violate any company policy. So how do you handle that situation?
And how does the First Amendment fold into things said off the clock?
Oh, I love that. So the First Amendment, right? You want to get super nerdy real quick, but the Constitution was written to limit what our government can do. My government can't tell me what I can and can't say. And there's repercussions to that. But for a business is, once again, its own person. It can say, you can't say that. Now, what's their repercussion for that? Maybe if they fire somebody who said something that a lot of people agree with, all of those people can vote with their dollars now. That's where the internet's a wonderful thing and a powerful thing, and sometimes scary, is that we talk about sometimes the cancel culture out there, but that's a bunch of people that have finally figured out that their power is sometimes their wallet. And they can actually dictate how a business is run.
So let's just, I got to unpack this. You work for me. I can say, Scott, you cannot support the New Orleans Saints. Don't talk about it publicly. Don't go to their games, whatever. I'm a huge Falcons fan. I have that right as a business owner, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
I terminate you, or you go off to greener pastures, and you start blasting on Facebook that I said you couldn't. You couldn't support the New Orleans Saints. I can have 50,000 Saints fans that boycott my business overnight.
Oh, yeah. And look, you don't even have to fire me.
Who are you, the NFL?
You don't even have to fire me. I could go to the Saints game, right? Probably go to the Saints-Falcon games, or maybe I'm just posting the 28-3 meme every day and saying, take this, Chaz, and then you fire me because I did that. And that's where, there could be issues, especially if that policy is what you have. But I have some argument that, man, I was the only person over 40 in your business, and you fired me. And you don't have any proof that you didn't fire me because of your age.
Well, that was an easy one. What if it's politics? What if I say you can't support Donald Trump or you can't support Joe Biden?
Well, that's where you have to worry about, like you said, that's where you have to actually worry about the public things. Because where are you located, right? If I fire you because you're not a Trump supporter, that might work here. You might not lose any business. But you might live in California, and that's a whole different ballgame, because people get to vote with their wallets. And now with the internet, they get to share those ideas with each other. Sometimes what they do is they collaborate to find out what people are doing. There was a documentary on Netflix called Don't F with Cats. And man, it started off with a video of this guy posted a video that he did something to a cat, and the cat people didn't like it. And people started watching the video and breaking down every frame and, what was the cup in the background and who makes it, and it's only sold in this region. And they figured out who the guy was. And then they go after him. And when they go after him, they now start to say, hey, business that employs this guy, do you support this kind of behavior? That was completely outside of what he does for a job. But now they have to make a decision. What do we do with this?
Do you offer some type of audit that you can go into a business and look for people's blind spots, things like this that they're not thinking about?
Absolutely. I mean, that comes back to the experience I had of doing due diligence when buying a small business. It's the same thing, right? When I did my due diligence, what I was looking for is, what are the things this company's doing that if we continue that practice as the one buying it, that's going to put us in trouble.
So kind of a follow-up to the social media questions. What are the repercussions of going on Facebook and writing about my experience working with a business, and how is that different than writing a bad review?
So with your company, one way that you could really get in trouble is you may have some agreements that you signed when you got on with the company, or sometimes when people get up in higher levels of a company, they get bonuses, and those bonuses come with a contract. And part of the contract may say you're not allowed to disparage the company. So the way that works is, because now, let's say it's because of a bonus, right? I'm going to give you $50,000 a year bonus, but part of the deal is you don't get to talk bad about us. So the repercussion that you have is, I could go on Facebook and I could talk bad about that company all I want, but I'm not going to get my $50,000, right? So there's ways
to give it back.
Or you have to give it back. And that's real hard sometimes, because that's already spent.
Right. But the person doesn't want to deal with the lawsuit either, right?
Well, I mean, they're not going to be sued over that. I mean, they're going to be sued potentially in the contract situation, but let's say they don't have that contract. Can a company fire you for talking bad about them? They can, because we're in an at-will employment state. As long as I can make sure that I crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's.
It wasn't for a bad reason. It
Right.
wasn't for an illegal reason.
That's really what you got to do as a company, is make sure you show all the ways that you didn't do it for a bad reason. Right? You go back to like Eminem at 8 Mile, and you got to take the bullets out of their gun before you shoot yours.
Right. Well, the other thing I want to touch on is non-compete agreements. Are you someone who can review a non-compete agreement? And, well, first, let's explain what a non-compete agreement is.
Yeah, that's another one that some businesses really skirt and sometimes do things that aren't allowed. But a non-compete agreement is essentially saying, hey, you employee, if you leave working for us, you can't do anything or go work for a business or start a business or sometimes even help a business, because it'll even have indirectly, right? You can't do those things that may compete with us. We don't want you taking our money away, right? You have all this knowledge about how we do things. You know who our customers are. You actually have relationships with our customers.
We paid you to build those relationships with those customers. So how dare you go work for a competing business and take our customers that we paid you for?
Right. And a lot of times that company helped you get there, right? It's not just the salary they gave you, but their own clout's what got you in the door to meet these people in the first place.
Right.
So, I mean, look, those non-competes, do they serve a purpose? They do, because a business really has a vested interest. They've spent a lot of money and time and their own political capital. And when I say political, I mean, that's just, they come in, I can say, hey, I work for Amazon. I might get that meeting before the guy that works for the other store.
They're piggybacking on the goodwill of the company,
right?
Potentially.
So there's a value you received in that. And that's the thing with any kind of contract. You received a value. So what are you giving the company back in return? And that would be the agreement that I'm not going to compete with you for a little while.
Is it true that non-competes don't hold water in Louisiana?
So the thing with most non-competes is nowadays, I think most lawyers and people probably get, even the ones off the internet now, have figured out where the judges have said, hey, you've gone too far in this non-compete. Because we still have this idea of, I can't stop somebody from making a living, right? Right. Everybody's got a right
it's
to
not good
work.
it's not good for society or the economy
No.
if people are out the workforce for more than 2 years.
So there's a couple of areas where your non-compete has to be reined in a little bit. And it's in your scope, it's in your time, and it's in your geography. So scope first. I can't say, hey, I own a restaurant. You can't go you can't go work for any other business, right? I can't say that. I can say you can't go work for another restaurant. So that's the scope, right? You got to get it within what you actually do. I can't make you stop do things and not compete with me in something that I'm not doing, because I might do it one day. And then there's time.
And the more specific the scope, the better chance it has of holding up in court.
Correct. Because it actually has to be something that I knew I was going to compete against you with. The next one is time, and that is, I can't make it forever. So what's a reasonable time? And the courts have generally in most states come down to 2 years. Some states look at it a year, which can be reasonable. And then the last one is geography. And that means if I'm a company that's only selling products here in Louisiana, for example, I can't say, hey, man, you can't go compete with me in California. Because maybe you say, look, I quit, but I still like this thing, but I understand I have a non-compete. I'm going to go move to California because I don't think I'm competing with you. Well, you don't get to say I think you are when you're not bothering to go over there either.
Last time I checked, I could be off on this, but you had to limit the geography to even smaller than the state. It had to be a defined area like these listed parishes or these listed counties.
Right. So the courts have taken that idea that I just said about California versus Louisiana and said, man, states are pretty big too.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody that's living down in New Orleans and decides to move to Shreveport or Monroe, like, are you really competing with them if you're not selling up there?
If you have a pizza shop in New Orleans and you want to go open a pizza shop in Shreveport, right, there's no direct competition there.
Not if you haven't already opened one up over there. Right.
Right.
So the funny thing is, you bring up the idea of those non-competes, and just today the news hit that the FTC is actually looking at making all non-competes null and void.
That's crazy.
Not just going forward, but everyone that exists.
Wow.
Yeah,
that can have huge ramifications.
Yep, that hit the news today.
Yeah, speaking of news, that's big in the news journalist community. Let's say local media. I when I was on local television, I had a non-compete. So if I was at channel News 15, I couldn't go to KTC just right off the bat. But you're saying that what the FTC is trying to do is I could do that at that time.
Yeah, I mean, look, your current administration is more friendly to the employees right now. There's a lot of things they're doing to give more protections to our workers out there. And part of that you saw coming out of, we were talking about COVID, right? But there's so many people that did go start their own businesses. But there's also so many people that are seeing now that I have other opportunities, right? It made them rethink where they're going to work and what they're going to do because so many businesses had to go remote that so many people realized, man, I can go work anywhere, right? I don't have to work somewhere in my hometown. I can go work anywhere. And now they've created this thing where they have more power, but the structure that was set up before that was so geared towards being helpful to the businesses. So you're starting to see the pendulum swing back some.
How do you think businesses will react without the ability to put in place non-competes?
There's still other ways to protect your trade secrets and some of those things, right? A non-compete's very restrictive. It just means you can't go do anything, but I could still have a non-disparagement clause and a bonus. I could still have something about not stealing my trade secrets, and I can bring a lawsuit against somebody if I think they did do that, right? They stole certain things that were proprietary to my business.
Can you imagine? I hate to blast Carter here, but is it presumptuous to say that local media, they don't make a lot of money on air talent?
That is not presumptuous at all.
Okay.
Of course, there's people who have been here forever who have make a good career, just putting in the time and notoriety, years and years and years of putting in the work. But just coming right. This is a small market here, like 121 in the U.S. So it's a lot of people coming right out of college, just not making that much, like $24,000 a year to start off.
So you have three local media stations. You got a guy making $20,000 a year, and the network says you can't work for anyone for 2 years in the, I guess, the Acadiana market.
Right.
That was the defined term. Mm-hmm. That's pretty onerous on someone.
It could be. I mean, but you're saying the Acadia in the area, you could go move an hour west or an hour north and you'd be fine. Yeah. Some people, that's not feasible.
But they also have to have a job opening, and he's tapping into a brand new market where no one knows his face, right? And they have employees, and they have a university there kicking out broadcast majors. And I'm trying to give an example of how onerous a non-compete can be. Obviously, the other side of it is you have an oilfield service company, you make all these relationships, you're out in sales, and you think, man, I could go do this on my own and scoop up all the business. They like me anyway. The owner's playing golf every day. That's what they're trying to protect against. Or are you going to work for the competitor and bringing all the customers in the same?
I mean, if you want to get into the oilfield services area, there's a very interesting way that the non-competes can come in. And now this can come down to your frontline employees, right? I can have some guys that are working on a rig, maybe a safety guy or the company man, as they call it, the one running it, or the driller or one of those things. And they work on that rig with all the other service companies and the operator that's running that rig. And they come to like that guy, and they like the way he does their work, right? Like Chaz shows up on time, and he never makes mistakes, and we like him. And now Chaz is mad, and he doesn't like the way his company's treating him, so he decides, I'm going to go to the competitor. Well, now, me as the person running this rig, I get to decide which service companies we're using, but I really like Chaz, so how about we just switch to Chaz's new company? So there's ways that an actual front-end line employee can just take the customer with you because nobody wants to change how they were doing business. So it's a very easy way that you can start to lose a lot of business because your employees are leaving to go somewhere else.
You worked in a huge company. You work with small businesses. What would you recommend a business do to really take care of employees and really prevent them from leaving in 2023 and beyond? Where is the new wave? Where do you see it going? What matters?
I mean, that matters so differently. I mean, you can watch in the way everything happens in the news is we have so many different opinions from people of what they want out of life, just out of life. And then now it's starting to come into how my job contributes to my life, right? It used to be that your job was number one, and then you figure out a way to make a life out of what the time you had left. And you're starting to see people say, no, my life and my job's supposed to be supplementing my life. And that's where businesses start to have to look at that and actually figure out, how do I answer all of those needs? Because they're not all the same. It's no longer just keep giving them raises, right? That's not the answer.
Money is not the motivator.
No, I mean, I left my position making a lot more money than I make these days. But part of that was the work-life balance wasn't working. So how does a company address that? The non-compete's really going to be going the way of the dodo, whether the government steps in or not. because you already hear a lot out there, right? Good work's hard to find. Nobody wants to work. No, they want to work. They don't want to work for you. You don't pay enough. You don't treat them the right way. That's what companies are starting to see. You're starting to see that from an investment standpoint. There's this idea of ESG, which means environmental, social, and governance. And what they're talking about there is people are starting to actually invest their money in companies that are treating not just their employees well, but they are treating the environment well. They're treating their customers well. They have diversity within their company. That's where the governance comes in. They have diversity within the leadership. So you're starting to see that companies are going to have to start addressing things that may be outside of the profitability of the company, right? How efficient we are and how good we are at making these things, and start to worry about the bigger picture. Because once again, people learned how to vote with their money.
And do you think all those things that you just said about, you hear there's not enough workers, people don't want to work, this and that. Do you think that the employees have harnessed more power than the employer with this wave, with this change?
I think with the way COVID made a lot of people, like I said, reevaluate things, it made a lot of employees start to think about these things. And they also got at home and on the internet. I mean, one of the things I do, I get on Reddit every day. And there's all these Reddits, just a collection of people giving their ideas. And sometimes I see somebody just post, here's the new policy my company came up with. And what I get to see is hundreds of people all tell that person, hey, man, that's illegal. Or somebody even come in, I'm a lawyer, here's explaining it. So now they have access to this information they used to not have. So now you can't quite get away with some of those things too. I've seen so many companies put out a new policy to try and deal with, hey, calling in sick or all these other things. And they're trying to curtail these problems that they see out there, and they don't even realize, or maybe they do, and hope that their employees are ignorant of what the law is. And now it's very hard for that to happen because they have such access to information.
Scott, if you, we're going to wrapping up here. If you wanted to tell a business what you need to evaluate yourself, you need to do these things. Every business, every local small business should do these things to self-audit. What would you suggest they do?
A first thing I'd say is, how good are your contracts? And by asking that question, sometimes you'll find out I don't have any or I don't have enough. What's your customer contract look like? Some people just go, get the work, send the invoice. And what happens if that customer is upset later? Or they didn't even know what to expect, and then they didn't get what they expected, and it's because you weren't clear about it in the front. And that's a contract can help with. That contract's going to help you deal with employee issues. It's going to help you deal with your vendors. So I'd tell people, go look at your contracts, because then a lot of times the question comes back, what am I supposed to be looking for? Okay, great, I can help you. The next biggest thing is making sure you're treating your employees well. Not just because, all the things we talked about, but there's a lot of laws, and that's the one that'll kill your company very fast. Are you paying them correctly? Because there's a lot of how overtime is worked and whether or not you classify your employee as an employee or an independent contractor. That's why Uber wants them to be independent contractors for a lot of reasons, including I don't want to pay overtime. Overtime's a killer to some companies too, but they don't want to hire more people, so they don't have overtime, or once again, can't find anybody.
Great, man. Well, I seriously thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. If people want to find you, Scott, where can we go? Where do we look?
But it's very simple. It's Guidry.group. And that's Guidry.
Guidry.group. No .com, right?
No .com. That's it.
Are you on social media yet?
I'm on Instagram, Guidry.group. I'm on Facebook, Guidry Group LA.
Awesome, man. Well, we wish you luck. We thank you for being here, and thanks a lot, bro.
That was always a pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast. None of the opinions of the guests reflect that of my own, and nothing in this podcast is to be considered legal advice or create an attorney-client relationship. This is for entertainment purposes only. Thank you for watching and listening. Hope you enjoyed.